Okay. Welcome to Saturday, the 22nd of February. It's Weekly Marx. Yesterday was an anniversary for the publication of the Communist Manifesto. Not that you should be carrying a copy around with you and all, but our friend Rariki helped us commemorate this a couple of years ago and around exactly this time. And I figure I should bring it back just for the heck of it. Also, I came across two little pieces on the relevance or not irrelevance of the manifesto in the 21st century. So I'm going to read a little bit of that, and I hope you'll find that interesting. I've included on this particular page the complete audio book, which is in YouTube, and another commentary by China Mieville on the Communist Manifesto, which people come back to. It's a revolutionary document, as I've said, and the reason why we cover or I continue to cover Capital Volume One is that there is a relationship between the two, and it's worth considering. One is sort of ancillary to the other on the one hand. On the other hand, it provides certain empirical evidence for why there should be a Communist Manifesto. So, Communist Manifesto in the 21st Century, Paul Sweezy, John Mage, and John Bellamy Foster. Of course, Paul Sweezy passed away in 2004. And published a something on the 150th anniversary in May of 1998 of Monthly Review, which is one of the kind of uh, primary texts in thinking about academic journals for sort of a Marxism in general, not a particular brand in particular. And but anyway. The crisis of capitalism, 1848, when the manifesto was written, was a crisis year in Europe. 2018 was the 10th year of an endless crisis for a now fully globalized capitalist economy. What Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said about the commercial crises that, by their periodic return, put on its trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the entire bourgeois society is just as applicable to our own time, and so is the diagnosis of the basic cause. In these crises, they wrote, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Today, this might be better formulated to read an epoch of overproduction of the means of production. Bourgeois economics still does not get it and probably never will. The Great Financial Crisis and the Great Recession began in the United States in 2007 to 2008 and quickly spread across the globe, marking what appears to be a turning point in world history. Although this was followed within 2 years by an extended recovery phase, the weakest in the last century, the world economy 10 years after the outset of the crisis is still in the doldrums. The United States, Europe, and Japan remain caught in a condition of slow growth and financial instability, with new economic tremors appearing all the time and the effects spreading globally. The one bright spot in the world economy from a growth standpoint has been the seemingly unstoppable expansion of a handful of emerging economies, particularly China. Yet the continuing stability of China is now also in question, especially insofar as it depends on a high degree of integration with global capitalism. Hence, the general consensus among informed economic observers is that the world capitalist economy is facing the threat of long-term economic stagnation complicated by the prospect of further financial deleveraging, sometimes referred to as the problem of lost decades. Japan had one of those, for example. It is this issue of the stagnation of the capitalist economy that has emerged as the big question worldwide, setting aside the issue of the environment, even for all serious bourgeois economists. The manifesto's analysis of the succession of crises that put on its trial, each time more threateningly, the existence of the entire bourgeois society remains central to any attempt to predict the events of the coming years. The long, weak recovery was made possible only by an unprecedented global expansion of debt, both public and private, itself made possible only by the forced reduction of interest rates to levels similarly without precedent. This flood of new debt went not into productive investment, as shown by the great stagnation in growth, but into a global inflation of asset prices. The result was the capture of almost all such gains as were produced in this last decade by that very small percent of the world's population who own the world's assets, whether real estate or securities. But global capitalism remains caught in the contradiction posed by the necessity of continuous expansion of profits through the capture of surplus value from the exploitation of labor, and the necessity of the valorization of that surplus value through either consumption or new investment. New investment in productive capacity in a global capitalism plagued by excess capacity is increasingly more a problem than a solution for the system. And the maintenance of workers' consumption, given the ever increasing downward pressure on wages worldwide and upward pressure on rents caused by asset inflation, has occurred only through a massive increase in working class debt. In the United States today, a majority of wage workers have in effect no net savings at all. The commercial cycle identified by the manifesto is still very much a certainty in an uncertain world. The recovery from the 2007-2008 Great Crisis is in its final phase, and the techniques of new debt and interest rate suppression that enabled the last recovery are really no longer available. The immediate prospect can only reinforce the continuing salience of the manifesto's phrase, each time more threateningly. So, where are we going? Marx and Engels were dedicated revolutionaries and firmly believed that the inherent and ineradicable contradictions of capitalism would generate a growing and ultimately successful revolutionary struggle to overturn the system and put in its place a more humane and rational one. But did their analysis allow for, perhaps even imply, a different historical outcome? The answer, we think, is unequivocally yes. Early on in the manifesto, indeed on the first page of the first section entitled Bourgeois and Proletarians, an oft-quoted passage reads, this is Marx and Engels, the history of hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. Nothing more is said about the common ruin of the contending classes in the manifesto, most likely because Marx and Engels did not consider it a likely outcome of the class struggle under capitalism. But if we look around us in the world today and take into account the extent to which capitalism is destroying or undermining the natural foundations of a sustainable economy, we must surely reinstate, quote, the common ruin of the contending classes, unquote, as a very realistic prospect in the historically near future. Now, what should we be trying to accomplish? We should be trying to impress on the peoples of the world the truth about capitalism, that it is not, as bourgeois ideologists want us to believe, the end of history, but that its continued existence can really bring the end of history. Does the manifesto offer us any help in this respect? Perhaps, if we read it carefully and interpret it imaginatively. In a too often neglected passage, Marx and Engels introduce a new theme into their analysis. Finally, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the process of dissolution going on within the ruling classes, in fact, within the whole range of old society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class that holds the future in its hands. Just as, therefore, at an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, so now a section of the bourgeoisie goes over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeois ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole. Unquote. For Marx, this reflected what he understood, see especially his discussion of pre-capitalist economic formations in the Grundrisse, as, quote, the age of dissolution, unquote, of class property relations that brought down feudal society. A similar age of dissolution, we believe, would bring down capitalism in turn, although the dissolution of capitalist relations would necessarily take a different form. Today, we can see more and more within present-day capitalism, particularly in the wealthiest countries, the emergence of acute contradictions that are accelerating the breaking up of the system, visible in the extremes of the polarization of income and wealth in all nations and globally, the corrosive interface of stagnation, financialization, and neoliberal globalization, and, most of all, the accelerating planetary crisis that threatens all of humanity. These historical developments are behind the dissolution presently going on within the ruling class, evident in the growing instability of the state. Notwithstanding the continuing ideological role performed by bourgeois economics, there's no hiding the acute contradictions of our age, which every child can see. As the unfolding of capitalism's deadly consequences proceed, more and more people, including not only revolutionary movements throughout the globe, but also bourgeois ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole, will come to see what has to be done if our species is to have any future at all. Our job is to help bring about this recognition in the shortest possible time, while there is still time. And note, of course, that there could also be a meteor in a couple of years, but that's another story. I included the forward to a book, a text, and I think that you can actually get the copy from the link here, Communism in the 21st Century, edited by Shannon Brincott, of 2014, and I'll just read part of the forward in the time that I have remaining. Marx and Communism. Marx is without doubt the most trenchant, unforgiving, scornful, and systematic critic of capitalism we have. But let's keep him in perspective. There have been far more savage destroyers of the commercial relationships that we know as the capitalist economy. Indeed, Marx left a yawning gap in his writings and even in his activism between critique and power. Others moved in historically to fill this near vacuum in appalling ways. In his lifetime, he wasn't famous. Infamy set in later. Discussion of Marx and communism at the moment puts us in the middle ground. While people will create and join political movements, small and large, with any number of different things in mind, and indeed in that way engaging in any number of different activities, peaceful and otherwise, it's worth pausing to consider how many people resisted rather than embraced the capital practices of capitalism for one reason or another. These practices were monetary exchange, private property in its more abstract and tradable forms, and wealth accumulation. As Marx often pointed out, and as many people knew already, capitalist practices were often aligned with domination, cruelty, and thuggery. However, this raises the question, who actually fought for this system? Who were the shock troops of capitalism? Capitalism didn't happen by accident, nor did it arrive from outer space. The perhaps surprising answer to this question is to look first to imperialism and colonialism, where there were actual shock troops. We can then project this inward within the nation state, and it's always violent history of formation due processes of enclosure, legal and intellectual reformations, expropriation, exploitation, and slavery. Marx did just this in his earliest journalism. and then jointly with Engels, their Communist Manifesto. The latter text undermines rather than reinforces, this is often claimed, the Eurocentric mythologies that Northern cultural and religious novelties in themselves produced the industrial revolutions that so occupied Marx and fascinated Engels. While I'm referring to only a sentence or two, it is clear in the manifesto that the bourgeois mode of production is kickstarted by the expropriation of capital from the New World and the subsequent trade in luxury products generated by the mines and plantations of chattel slavery or near equivalent use of labor. And there's considerable testimony in Marx, who spent considerable time citing reliable testimony from others of the violence inherent in domestic processes of social change. Marx's historically informed and logically sequential explication of how exactly capitalism got to where it was in his day evolves through the chapters of the Magisterial Capital, Volume 1. It is remarkable how little distance there is in theoretical or perhaps better philosophical terms between his work there and our world of hedging, derivatives, even automated trading and the like. Capital, for Marx, is self-expanding value, heading toward an infinity because of its abstract limitlessness. Human greed might have its limits, but a world which has a life of its own, where numerical relationships are the only reality, has none at all. Of course, Marx's book doesn't explain exactly how these things work, and it isn't a 101 account of the theory involved in the economics and mathematics that animates these practices today. But he offers a political and philosophical framing for the boom and bust capitalism of his time and ours that has appeal because, among other things, it exposes the vacuity of academic subjects that merely presume what needs to be justified. These are the properties and constraints of the intellectual, political, legal, moral, and religious common senses that must be in place for capitalism to make sense of itself as the only game in town. Common sense of this kind tells us that imperialism and colonialism were perhaps regrettable, but certainly over and done with, and in any case, over there somewhere else, but not here. That is, within social and geographic space domesticated as homelands for some. These metropoles were, of course, very powered up as nation states pursuing gross national product, GNP, of their own in what were increasingly international markets. But common sense about capitalist development also tells us that democracy, an apparatus of self-legitimating, selectively representative, and highly disciplinary institutions, is a political rather than economic framework. Or where the economic system is relevant, it must, of course, promote freedom, famously conceived by Locke as life, liberty, and property. Locke's ideas didn't come from nowhere, to be sure, but rather from the practicalities of making trading relationships work within or despite religious, communal, and cultural constraints, hostilities, and counter-revolutions. Marx's project was rather to insist that no political system makes sense as independent of an economic system, and more strongly, that economic systems generate political systems that secure them. As Marx spotted, identifying freedom with commercialism and consumerism, but more importantly, with the property, legal, and political systems that support these things, Marx spotted, was the way to recruit adherents to the cause. He had hard work arguing that those who signed on for this earthly liberation were working against their own best interests, and that this promised land, in his view, was as illusory a vision as the religious ones, for which he had nothing but this worldly scorn. For the few who could make it in the capitalist world, it was an undeserved success, falsely attributed to individual effort and hard work. For those who unsurprisingly didn't make it, it was but a lottery ticket with a very slim chance attached. Summing up so far, I see Marx as a thinker who blew off the conventions and boundary lines of his own times and as a theorist, which he has now become, stands opposed to their reinforcement in ours. This is on both the academic and the political side of things. Current disciplinary, obviously irony has faded away, and subdisciplinary and even interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary practices make it difficult to disentangle capitalism from democracy and commercialism from freedom. For Marx, of course, this was easier to do intellectually, but professionally, other than as an independent scholar, he had no life at all. Politically, things looked hopeful to him in 1848 to 49, and again in the late 1850s and on into the 1960s. But he died more than a little embittered. On the political side of things, we are obviously in a world where huge resources are deployed to promote capitalism, co-opt contrary campaigns, erase any concept of class, and undertake violent and murderous projects of state building as exercises in freedom and democracy. As Marx and Engels succinctly put it, the power of the modern state is merely a device for administering the common affairs of the whole bourgeois class. Or, in other words, the partisan politics of democratic states conforms to what the late Gore Vidal called the property party. Since Marx's time, things have gotten worse politically for those who socialism and communism opposes capitalism in principle. If read politically and in a certain framing, Marx's work is very good at describing how some things have become thinkable, moral, and commonsensical rather than controversial, immoral, or illegal. For example, profit making, interest on money, making a person into a laborer, and such like as these things often were before the fall into capitalism. One of the most interesting discussions in Capital Volume 1 is the passage in which Marx philosophizes as to what exactly one human must assume about another in order for commodity exchange and ultimately capitalism to become thinkable and doable. It is clear that his own political position is quite contrary to this, but meta-theoretical searches for his moral foundations have actually proved inconclusive. But then, as an activist, he didn't need these in making his rhetoric work. Only academics would be interested in recondite logics. Marx's more academic, yet still political interest was in attacking the economic intellectual establishment of his day, the political economists. Rather more specifically, his focus was on exposing their presuppositions and claims as politically charged, and indeed highly potent. As he said, merely exposing to the reading public their illogicalities and biases, even their omissions and falsehoods, was not enough. A movement contrary to capitalism would have to capture the broad mass of people and of peoples, and would have to be a reverse or inverted way of remaking the world as sensible and sense-making. It is an interesting exercise to reread Marx's critique of capitalism, the society in which the capitalist mode of production prevails, as a sardonic success story, but rather in a Nietzschean manner, exposing the human capacity for frailty, complicity, perversity, gullibility, hypocrisy, absurdity, and the like. What is difficult is reading his political activism as focused and effective in getting the many on board in order to resist a global social movement, which, as he himself admitted in quite celebratory passages, was remaking the earth, the human forms of life all over the planet, and thus the intellectual, moral, and political common senses through which the world is more or less intelligible to anyone. Class struggle, including class compromise, is the engine through which this intelligibility is constructed with huge effort and at huge cost. On the counter-capitalist side of things, at last, we encounter Marx's communism or socialism. The terms were not particularly well distinguished or even distinguishable at the time. Marx and Engels' critique of previous socialisms laid out for the world in Part 3 of their Communist Manifesto built on Engels' previous critical exercises and surveys more than on anything that Marx had done himself. The polemical sections of the so-called German ideology were a long-winded run-up to the snappier versions in the manifesto, where Engels' journalistic skills met Marx's sardonic wit and dismissive put-downs. Recent scholarship has promoted the idea that Marx was not wholly hostile to the utopians among the socialists and communists, and indeed this raises the wider perspective that overall, and for political purposes, he has himself been constructed biographically and interpreted academically as necessarily opposite to those whom he criticized. As intellectual biography, these constructions and interpretations are prone to drama, where strong characterization and clear contrast drive the plot. Yet, contrary to later dramatizations, Marx was aware that the communists and socialists he was criticizing were also his coalition partners, along with middle-class liberal revolutionaries in the pre-1848 context. And he was aware of his own identification with the tendency and movement, the latter more an announcement and call up to join rather than a descriptive term as such, not least because of the original title and mission statement of the Manifesto of the Communist Party. While the biographers and academics, both pro and con, have concentrated on making Marx distinct from his confrere, closer readings reveal a mutual but critical imbrication. Still, it is possible to discern a particular shape to Marx's communism, or rather to the way he conceived of his role within this quite loose categorization. Marx was wholly against gurus, personality cultists with revelatory doctrines and worshipping adherents. He also had absolutely nothing to do with religious framings, Christian ones in particular. He was resolutely for large-scale transformations, whether violent, because in working-class self-defense, or otherwise in some more peaceful transition towards socialism and communism. He had no time for historical anachronism and returns to a golden age of simplicity, nor was he sympathetic to top-down governance and leadership by enlightened intellects, and he presumed that the mass production of necessities at least would raise the quality of life and reduce working time in some sense. Curiously, though, none of these movements or attempted movements resembles the social forces through which capitalism was establishing itself and still is. I wonder if Marx gave some attention to the question, why was there no capitalist manifesto? Both the capitalist and the industrial revolutions, and the one wouldn't have been much without the other, were somewhat unself-conscious movements, or perhaps wealth creation for the few is such an age-old and obvious idea that it hardly needed to declare itself. Certainly collecting shock troops, whether conquistadors or buccaneers or regulars or tech boys, wasn't all that difficult, given the development of loanable wealth, as historians have demonstrated. Perhaps if there had been a capitalist manifesto, certain nations and or dynasties would have been made more successful capital and capitalism from their wealth. For example, Spain and the Habsburgs. Yet other locales seem to generate the end result from few resources other than a timely readiness with ideas and institutions. For example, the Low Countries. There were certainly any number of enlightened publications on the new thinking and bourgeois lifestyle in a growing literature, but this was not a self-conscious mass movement. Mass action was rather a last resort, as in France in 1789, and, as Marx was at pains to point out, it acquired its shock troops through a democratic sleight of hand, promising equality of a political sort and delivering inequality of economic outcomes. It seems that with respect to socialism, the sum of Marx's shibboleths listed above and his stated conclusion arising from his critique was that a groundswell of mentalities, local movements and campaigns, revolts and uprisings would win the day for communism in the only way it could be won. The French Revolution is well known to have been his model in some respects because it was driven by democratic anger at ruling classes and outmoded privileges and constraints. It burst out into massive, rapid change and spread the new ways abroad, picking up adherents, for example, in Marx's native Rhineland, as old institutions toppled and liberation spread. In simple terms, the result was the very striking and violent abolition of feudalism in France in 1789, and the triumph of commercial common sense that pressed on with revolutionizing social and political relationships, the continuance or restoration of feudal anachronisms notwithstanding, emperors. However harsh the counter revolutions in France or elsewhere, no post Napoleonic regime restored feudalism exactly as it had been. Despite Marx's efforts, democracy and political liberation were the cover story for national liberation and commercial liberation in various guises. Definitely not a democratic revolt that generalized the interests of the working class to all, a number of honorable exceptions notwithstanding. As a means, albeit messy ones, of throwing off local feudalisms and colonial domination, Marx's political rhetoric was, of course, supportive. However, what he fought against came to pass, namely the one standing for the other, for example, democracy standing for commercialism, thus reinforcing the very disjunction in political thinking that he had long opposed. Understanding his method of ideology critique didn't expose the power encompassed by this disjunction, since doing that would work against his aim of overthrowing it. But the political effects of taking democracy to be a solution to inequalities of wealth and power, rather than a highly effective way of explaining these discrepancies away, have been profound. Evidently, he had no idea how potent this displacement of earthly economic struggle by heavenly realms of supposed equality could be. There are, of course, two ways to take up the task today. One is to formulate an alternative to capitalism. Now, rather than policy palliatives, as social democrats have done, but this strategy easily falls into the logic of mass movements and enthusiasms, doctrinal prophets, and crazed leaders that made the 20th century so violent and counterproductive to the cause. The other is to do as Marx and Engels did and locate the movement as ongoing already, just needing publicity and better explication. This involved explaining the movement to itself, as well as to potential adherents, and of course, famously defying the opposition to resist. Michael Hart, usually in conjunction with Antonio Negri, has taken this line, although I have found Empire and Multitude, these two books, rather less punchy and rousing than Marx and Engels' rhetorical constructions. Hart's later essay, The Common in Communism, continues in this vein by taking the common to be vaguely defined area, probably knowledge production and artistic creativity that is already produced, so he says, in processes that are external to capital. He describes it as a realm of autonomous human production, and common because it's characterized by open access and sharing. Perhaps as a metaphor for the elusive concepts of communism that Marx, or on famously few occasions, allowed himself to hint at, there is indeed some connection, or possibly of independent value. Marx doesn't have to be right about everything. However, Hart's approach is decidedly un-Marxian in both ignoring the heavy processes of infrastructure creation and maintenance, or conceivably decapitalizing and deindustrializing processes of winding this down, and the productive processes through which, his disclaimer notwithstanding, shareable knowledges and stimulating artworks can conceivably be created for sharing and open access at all. Marx's realm of necessity, underspecified as it is, or indeed anyone's realm of necessity, ought to be making an appearance, or its absence at least explained away. Marx may have put too much weight on the proletariat as a political subject and on trade unions as a way forward, but at least these are phenomena that inspire some credibility in their relationship to physical universals and social basics, broadly conceived. Or if Hart is arguing that communism should be going down the road to mutualism through individual autonomy and personal veto, a route Marx criticized as politically unrealistic, then he should say so. Cooperation is no doubt a powerful political force, powerful social force, and in truth, it incentivizes more than a few individuals, and possibly more than self-interest in many circumstances. But compared with Marx's theorization, which links class politics with visible productive forces, it suffers the flaw that Marx himself is always swift to focus on. There is no consumption without production. Methodologically, this argues that Marx distinguishes himself and his communism from both capitalism and cooperative or welfare socialisms by focusing on social production in the first instance, and thus its organization as the very basis from which law, politics, morality, and all else must proceed. The upshot of this, of course, is that consumption based theories, whether of liberal democracy or market economics, never achieve a real commonality at all, however equally they share out goods and services, or however open their access to goods that have already been produced and aren't apparently scarce. Planned economies, as they were known in the communist world, generally proceeded without much buy in from the workers or consumers involved. The mystery, of course, is why capitalist economies, regulated and state driven as they are, generate the buy in that they do, and from workers in particular. It may be that the buy-in is unraveling now, given the decline in real wages, huge growth in inequality, hypervisibility of undeserved wealth, casualization of employment, and withdrawal of pensions and social services. Remember Social Security and Medicare. Perhaps in some instances, the magic of patriotic warfare is ceasing to work, given the obvious opportunity cost, not to mention working class lives. In an age of volunteer armies, most powerful states have returned to a cannon fodder mentality by which economic necessities and ambitions drive poorer citizens and, as in the United States, non citizen green card holders into the military. These forces are then deployed in ways that have left legislative declarations of war and lately the Geneva Convention laws of war far behind, often using humanitarian intervention as a cover for what might be geostrategic ambitions. In some cases, such as the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the tenuousness of the reasoning involved and the almost insane character of military operations leaves one quite breathless. The Communist Manifesto left us a list of specificities quite remarkably coincident with more or less current visions of social democracy. Indeed, in their highly various ways, the contributions to these volumes on communism in the 21st century, this book, discuss concepts and views related to the question, what is to be done? My task here has been to ponder the question, how did capitalism win over hearts and minds, mobilize large-scale social forces of revolution and then counter-revolution, and produce its own list of specificities? In those terms, ideologies of the nation-state and of its democratic institutions were clear winners. Notwithstanding the vast numbers of people who fought and still fight tooth and nail for religious universalisms and authoritarian systems that run counter to these now venerable institutions. Welcome to 2025. As I've argued, the more fundamental economic arguments about the requirements of the production process and access to the goods and services produced were largely displaced by being naturalized or dressed up or mystified as market relations of consumption, driven by avoidance of the need to labor. Now, while there may be global enthusiasms for saving the environment or making poverty history or otherwise promoting a critical focus on capitalism, there's little sense in those theoretical formations of the precise social relationships that would revolutionize the present ones in real life. These are, of course, capital to labor, employer to worker, investor to rentier, wage earner, propertied landowner to homeless person, and so on. The familiar categories of the news media and general common sense. Marx's genius was to alert us to these and make them seem strange. Marx was right to contrast earlier forms of production with each other in legal and social terms, as he did with pre-classical and ancient slavery, feudal systems of vassalage and tenure. He was then to identify precisely and in exact detail where the conceptual, moral, legal, and allied areas of the specific subjectivity of capitalism creep in, or storm in, as the case may be. But he didn't work out the opposing fundamentals of communism at that level. The chapters in the present volumes are contributions to ongoing efforts to overcome a human system that generates but offloads all kinds of negative externalities, as they're known in capitalist speak. These are much harder on some than on others. But then escape from the other is always another fantasy trope of capitalism with wide appeal. We are all in it together is a notorious piece of cant, but also an inescapable truism. As a way of thinking about this, communism is much better than most. This is by Terrell Carver, who's written some very, very good books on Marxism. Um, and so that's the second part of my little reading today. I think I'm pretty close to the end of my dedication, as it were, to the Communist Manifesto. The what Rariki originally meant to do in these um, to commemorate this day was to go through and read as all X number of pages of the Communist Manifesto, which is quite stirring to be read. But somehow it that's all kind of academic unless you're really at a meeting where you're just waving the damn thing in the air and talking to proletarians. It's the kind of thing that really can be stirring and get people out into the streets. But I'll leave you to listen to the linked audiobook and a commentary by Mieville on the Communist Manifesto. It is a stirring document. I mean, it's one really meant to get people to, run into the streets and do stuff. And we just don't get that kind of polemic these days. All we have is, lies and gaslighting and all that other stuff. So that's the end of my little bit today. Don't Look Up is a good example. Yes, actually, that may be the thing that's the kind of text that is a mass media text that will get people out there to do stuff. On the other hand, it is the standard trope in a variety of European films, mainly, is at some moment in the movie, uh, the Internationale is sung, and it seems somewhat obligatory or cliched, but it's still pretty stirring when you sit and do that. No different than um, the Marseillaise in Casablanca. There is a necessity to anthems are good. Anthems are fine, and national anthems are quite amusing. They can be quite fascinating in their particular historical context, and even more interesting, of course, is when you create new national anthems. Australia's new anthem is interesting. Canada's, of course, and then of course the booing of national anthems has come up recently, so we have those as well. Um, but I find them quite stirring. I mean, it is a kind of collective act to sing together at the beginning of a collective event, a cultural event of one kind or another. And I find that, American culture it has not enough of those things, whereas I think there's more of them in the old world context. But, that's kind of where we are. Okay, so I went through the chat. Uh, yes, pep rallies do frighten me as well. Depending how large they are, small pet rallies are okay. Football chant songs I find them quite amusing. But then again, I went to a place where 10 or 20 of us could chant in the football stands and make a significant racket. Um, but anyway, so that's that. Let me shut off the live stream or ask Joe if he's still up to shut down the live stream. I'm going to cut the share. Thank you very much, Joe. Tomorrow we're going to do chapter 10. Um, of Capital, Volume 1, the 2024 edition, by the two Pauls, the Princeton edition. And we'll continue to sort of trundle through it at chapter 10. We still got another 15 or some odd or whatever chapters to go. And so I hope you'll either join me then or listen on tape or on recording. Thank you very much. Let me thank you for your attention. Thank you, everyone. We've been undergoing a project, some of us, to track down Nancy Matheson, and I think we've gotten a little closer to at least tracking her daughter down. And I mean, I have thought over the last week or so that I should just hop in the car and head over there somehow and track her down, but then I will seem to be, it'll be a little too obnoxious or whatever, transgressive to hunt her down. Or find out how she is. So we're hoping to track her down at least via her ex-husband, who is a radio personality and is listed on the I think the city rolls of Oneonta. So oh, thank you for asking that question, Dave. There's actually an image of the Village People and Trump standing behind them dancing. Oh, God, where are we now?
Was he doing the wanking two giraffe stance?
Yeah, yes, the
Good.
making two jerks. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
God, is he? Uh, just it's a sad commentary on the United States.
We couldn't even get a charismatic, you know, dictator. We couldn't even, oh, it's just so bad.
Well, it's a cultural thing, unfortunately, that far too many Americans, were mesmerized by television and they watched The Apprentice in all of its different guises and Celebrity Apprentice. And, that's the life he leads. His shtick is to fire people, and hence, the entire mess of the federal government. Oh, well, I played a guy who fires people, so therefore I should do the same shtick for the federal government, which is not the way you run a federal government.
Guess why I'm late?
You were out biking
No,
and you got busted for speeding.
I've just been watching Idiocracy.
Oh,
I was just thinking of that. I was just going to say that Idiocracy is cooler than this.
Because I think Anna brought it up earlier in the week. I was like, oh, you haven't watched that for ages. I thought, oh, I'll watch it tonight.
I saw a meme that had Elon with the chainsaw and then the president in Idiocracy with the gun holding it up. But yeah, Idiocracy, I would rather have that. That's kind of like, I don't know. It's better than this. I mean, it's like, I don't know.
Seems more retrievable.
It seems like less of a threat. If you're smart, you can navigate it, But this is just cruelty. This isn't stupidity. This is just cruelty. And that's another reason they like Trump. He's just an asshole that still has people around him.
Oh, it's ugly
Still has cameras on him.
It's just the extension of ugly Americanism. Americans have always been like that, and it's kind of, we all assimilate sort of the hegemonic arrogance that comes with being a superpower.
Yeah, I heard a great comment. So what do they say that like a narcissist in a relationship, it's like what do you call it? Psychological colonialism.
Yep.
You're going to live by my reality. I'm going to take up all the space in there, and it's going to serve my reality. Yeah. So it's been what, 2 weeks, Nancy watch?
Yes.
My, that is significant. Although if it was me, you probably guys would probably know not to worry, right? You'd have to wait like 6 months before you think, is he okay?
Well, I mean, how long did it take us, to try and figure out Cameron? I mean, and in fact, we were the ones who, it's just sad, I guess.
Yeah, there's nobody that knew that you were waiting for him and that you needed to be notified, you know?
I do think it's an idea that, as Joe mentioned, we probably should try to SMS her daughter. I don't know if she'd use his text messaging, so.
Well, if it's a mobile device, then it will receive. Should,
Yeah.
I assume.
Well, there are two numbers. So one is, I think, from when she likely lived in the 718. Well, the 347, I think, is a cell phone, and the 718 is a landline, I think.
So where did we go? Do you remember this in Idiocracy, Lane?
Fuddruckers outside of Mecca. That was really funny last night. About Fuddruckers outside of Mecca, and I remember in reading his book, he included the sentence, and I was just being an editor and asking, well, why did he put in this piece of dialogue about mounting a camel? And I thought you'd normally put ride a camel, but I think he left the mount a camel in there for some lascivious reason, even though it doesn't work in context. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm more curious about the back history of these two characters.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty wacky there. Yeah, I don't even want to hypothesize.
I don't know, man. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, which is just right next to Western Pennsylvania, and I was not fucking naive about shit.
Indeed.
So,
Yeah,
Lane, you remember this?
Yeah. You showed it twice.
Yeah.
Right?
The kids, I was right? That it basically transforms from this with kids running around, birthday party, to kids running around in the future being called butt fuckers.
It stood out. Yeah. Stood out.
Oh, man. So are we going to watch this thing together or what?
You gotta wait till I'm done baiting.
Well,
leave you alone, I'm baiting.
This is our family booth.
Cool. That's pretty cool.
Omani restaurant. Not that one. The translation, it was only in Arabic, the menu.
Victory or not success.
It's out on the foot with sheer was the first meal. Omar grill with shisha. Troy with shoes. Victory or not success.
God, weird.
Freeze size. Faraj mushalak chicken. Mullah coupled with 2 good cases on or off.
Weird. Weird.
Prayer components freely. Uncle Sandwich Rocket.
Squish chicken. Squish chicken rocket. I like that idea.
They're very poetic dishes.
Uncle Sandwich Rocket. That's amazing.
So you'd walk into the.
That sounds like actually, that sounds awful if you think about it.
So they had these there was like a main entrance area, and then these little rooms with carpeting over the, so you'd have this private room to yourself. This is where women and family eat. On the floor, they put a plastic piece of plastic down, serve you the greens and onions, flavored rice, chicken, stewed beef, hot as fuck, onions and garbanzo.
Yum.
Yep, floor eating. Excellent.
Nice.
Good. Wouldn't be able to get back up. Actually, I
This
wouldn't be able
was,
to get down.
oh my God, it was so painful.
Yeah.
Each of the rooms, I don't know if they're for specific families or tribes or whatnot, but
Nice.
one was Wadi Al Bahi's neighborhood. Wadi Al Lami neighborhood.
Oh, man.
It was a 30-minute walk across a desolate landscape, up and over a freeway bridge, across a few drainage ditches.
Huh.
Very romantic.
Indeed.
Look at the scale of this sprawl. It's just insane.
Yeah. Talk about overbuilt. Wow. Is
We
that
could
a
have gone to
shopping center?
the glittering shopping mall next to the hotel, but overpriced. And yeah, we saw this little squawker all alone,
A little
not doing so well.
poor kid.
What is it with you and stray animals?
Hello.
Oh,
Hello, little one.
little bugger.
Yeah.
Oh, after your toes.
It's the prayer rug. I was looking up on the ceiling. I was like, "What the hell? Somebody have a party here and put a wine label up there or something?" And then I got a closer look at it. This is the directional.
Oh, Mecca.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was scary. Well, I did some videos today. I went to the Grove. I'm going to have to. I didn't get the thing rigged up for holsters for gimbals and stuff yet. I tried a couple of like sucky pad things to suck onto the scooter to mount my camera, and they didn't work. So I had to do a lot of it with one hand again, but it was fun. And it was warm. It was even warm down by the sea. Well, warm for February. But yeah, it's been mint.
You mean suction cups?
Yeah, that's sucky cups.
Do you
Sucky
have
cup.
something you could put
It's all curved.
clamp?
I need a flatter area for everything. I bought different size little holster things, but I think it's gonna be more like when I put the new mirrors on because they've got long bars. These ones have got on a crap little plastic things. Um, I'll have to attach something to one of the bars. They're like chrome steel strong bars. These are plastic little shitty. You can't attach anything to them basically. The ones I've got on, the ones you get free. Um, but yeah. So I went to the Grove. I went round all the shops. video that next slightly. So all these rambles I've had with these, you'll be able to understand, not understand, just see where it is, basically. Then on the way down to the harbour, this old woman stopped us to ask us about my scooter. We got chatting. That's all on film. She was lovely. On the way down the bottom of that road, the same road, it's where my dad used to live. It's called Malvern. It's Beirut. That's where they had them riots last year. And I showed you the footage with the helicopters and stuff.
Right.
Well, well, that exact area, those fields, because I was filming, went past a bunch of cars with proper scallies. Well, actually, one car drove past. And I went, I think you've got a scratch, mate. Because he's fucking on the front of the car, was just wrecked. It's like, totally like. I was thinking, as soon as I said that, I thought, he didn't look at me very well. Well, like, who's that? And then where he'd just driven from was the street where I was conceived, but isn't there anymore. Just the road's there, but the houses have been long knocked down. There was loads of cars there with proper Raj packet Chavas on there, proper fucking, and one of them guns, something like, what was it? Hope you're not videoing this. Oh, and I am. Didn't worry, anybody knows you. Because he's clearly dealing or something like that. You know what I mean? That's clearly where the deal from or something. And these kids, I was gutted. There's been loads of times I've thought, well, that's fun. I'll just put my camera in my pocket now and tootle on. And I've gone, fuck, what an idiot. Should have kept my camera on. These little lads, they were funny, like about half a dozen of them. One of them guns, is it gone? I wonder if you can give us a pick. Me and the dog are piggyback down at the harbour. Because I was like, why do you think I'm on this? I cannot walk. He was laughing his head off. His mates were ripping the piss out of him. It was class. I was like, fuck no! I've left the camera on. Um, you're gonna not believe this shit. Went to the Tommy statue and I heard this accent. I went, "Are you American?" And yeah, I'm from Florida. There was a Floridian there. He's on the video. There was a couple there came over and they were like sort of not, I wouldn't say elderly, but they weren't young, and they were quite well dressed. And they were definitely tourists. I'll put it like that. Uh, One was going on about me scooters. Oh, we tried to convince his mother to get a scooter. She won't have one. She's so embarrassed about being on a scooter. Well, I understand that because I was the same. It's taken me 10 years to get one of these because I was just so like, I was like, look at this, I'm fat and I'm on a scooter. I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? It's every joke you say in the, if you're going, yeah, I totally get it. But I think that's what it is. She's probably just a bit. And as I was driving away, they've been waiting for us. And they went, uh, here she is. She was in the car. And so I was sat there going forwards a bit and then reversing a bit, going, look, get one of these. And I was like, what am I doing? It's all tourists. I didn't see anybody I knew. So now I know what old Lee keeps harping on about. It's weird. You don't actually. I did see one person I knew, and that's the photographer. Don't want to do all museum artwork.
Yeah.
I'm even nicking it off this one lad called Paul Levitt, and he's got a dog called Reggie. Dog's more famous than him, and he's a big dog. It's a pit bull, but it's like a huge. It's a shark with legs. And I thought, oh, Coco, please don't. He didn't. He was fine. He wasn't. Didn't go ape shit. I was thinking that's definitely Paul Levitt. So I went, are you a photographer? He went, yes. I went, I'm Lane, and I use your stuff for my artwork. I keep tagging you in. He went, yeah, I got mate, that's awesome stuff, that like. So I took a photo of him. There's loads of times I would keep turning my camera off to save power, then something better was happening. I was like, oh, fuck. So I got the docks, and when I came back, I got halfway up Church Street, which is the main street in Seaham, and the batteries went kaput, and then I looked at me scooter, and the battery was almost kaput on that. So I was like, oh. So I crept back at about a lowly 6 miles per hour. And I know, like 8 miles per hour is not very fast, but you do miss that too when you're only doing 6. I made it home at 6 miles per hour, tootling, trying to save the battery. And I was trying to think of the equivalent. What would be the battery version of running on fumes? Like running on in depleted electrons, something like that. I don't know what you would call it. Oh, I'm running on depleted electrons here. I thought you lot would know. I thought John would know, actually. Probably used in Star Trek. You're still live, by the way.
Oh, we are. Why is that?
He's me
It got
yammering on like a tit.